Hi, everyone. Welcome back and happy Thursday. So today I've got Jennifer Garnavai here. Jennifer, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Hey guys, Jennifer here. Happy Thursday. So I am a contractor in recruiting, currently on site at Google, and I have been here for a year and 3 months, previously coming from a background of promotions, property management, event management, and bartending. So got a pretty eclectic background, but I've been in recruiting type sphere for the past 4 years and have been on site at Google for the past about 15 months.
Nice. So you said property management. You came from an industry that I'm currently working in the tech sphere.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, I used to do property management for a lot like VRBO, like rental homes and renting them out in a ski area in New Mexico.
Nice. Did you guys use Entrada by any chance?
We did not. We were far behind in the technical sphere. I actually helped to build out some of our operational systems when I was there. So no, but I bet you that would have been helpful.
Cool. Vicky says it's echoing, so I'm going to try and do something. Do you hear it echoing on your end?
No, I don't hear you echoing.
Okay. All right, let's do quick mic check.
Is it me echoing or you echoing? That would be
okay. Vicky, let us know if that's better. Yeah. So Jennifer, you're very active on LinkedIn. You've got pretty good LinkedIn presence going, and you are working at a company that a lot of people dream to work about to work at. Can you talk a bit about why you're showing up on LinkedIn and what that's been able to do for you?
Yeah, of course. So my LinkedIn journey actually started for very different reasons. I originally, made a LinkedIn years ago in college because they tell you need one, right? They're like, make a LinkedIn, you got to network. And I always thought that just like having a LinkedIn profile was networking and that was enough. And just like knowing people in person and having conversations. And I didn't fully realize like the capacity of what LinkedIn is. So I joined an external growth course through LinkedIn, and I've been really enjoying that. And through doing that external course, it really just motivated me and inspired me to put content out there for job seekers, especially in regards to, I send however many rejection emails a week to all, unfortunately, people who aren't qualified for roles. And I can't tell you how many people respond and, they have questions and they want to know how they can improve and what they can do better. And so, I was really just inspired to start putting content out there to help job seekers in general. Unfortunately, I'm not able to have, 800 30-minute phone chats with a bunch of people. So I found that the best way for me to do that and help was to start making content, to start putting that out there in the hopes that it can help job seekers. And so far, the response has been great, and I've been having so much fun. And when I feel helpful, it truly is, my passion and what I love to do.
I love that. Yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat. I've realized at some point that I've got so many people who do connect with me from my Medium articles that at some point it's like, look, guys, I got to scale. We got to do this differently. I can't just have all these one-off calls with people. So that's why we do these live streams. Yeah, and Jennifer, can you talk a bit, as much as you're able to, about what it was like to get hired with Google?
Yeah, sure. So I have a unique experience in the fact that I'm a contractor. So when you're a contractor, there's almost like an extra layer you have to go through, because you have to go through not only the staffing agency, but then you have to go through the company you're working with as well. So it honestly depends on how the company finds you. A lot of times, if you come via referral, then the company, such as in my case, Google, will reach out to the staffing company and say, hey, we're interested in this person. Can you go then headhunt them? And it goes through the staffing agency in that regard. And then oftentimes the staffing agency themselves are the ones who are looking for people, and then they take them to Google or whoever the company is and say, hey, we have a great batch of candidates for this role that you wanted. sort of here they are. So I went through the referral route. I was very lucky enough to have a friend in contracting here in Austin, and he submitted my resume. I honestly didn't expect anything to come of it. I was like, Google doesn't want anything to do with me. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call from Adecco to go ahead and do a phone screen with them. So I worked through the process with the contracting agency and then at Google. And the interview process can be rigorous. They typically do have more than one person interview you. And that's for most tech companies. You're going to interview with different people who are all trying to assess different things. Typically there's one person looking for more of your communication skills. There's one person maybe more focused on like metrics and data and your core role. Someone else focused on leadership, etc. Just sort of depends on, what job you're looking for and what sphere you're coming from. So it can be very competitive coming in on contract as well. But I would say the contract is usually easier to attain than a full-time role. And there are more contract opportunities available for people with less experience, more new grads, and those types of people.
Would you say, so you would say that contract roles are probably a better way of getting into a large company like Google than just going the traditional route?
I would say yes. It's easier to obtain a contract role because typically they are leveled lower, and they don't require as many years of experience. Now, that's not to say that you can't have people with more years of experience. There are people on my contractor team who are over, like 40 years of age. You don't need to be at any certain sort of level within your career, but that is easier to attain than a full-time role, and you still get the same exposure and you get the same ability to learn. So, I am able to learn as much as, people on my team in a full-time position. And so even though I'm not in a full-time position now, I'm still gaining all that knowledge, which I can then leverage in the future for potentially another full-time position in tech.
Love that. And while we're on here, guys, I want to emphasize that we've got Jennifer. So ask your questions. Don't be shy. Don't be a wallflower. Like, come in here, ask questions. We've also got a link in the description, and then also I just posted it in the chat room, where you guys can you can jump on with us and you can ask Jennifer questions. You can ask me questions. It's a fantastic opportunity. Just take advantage of it while you've got us here. And Jennifer, in the meantime, while we're waiting for more people to file in and maybe someone to jump in with us on the live stream, I saw you posted a story that actually, it really resonated with me a lot. And I think it actually resonates with a lot of people, because a lot of, there's a lot of career changers who are getting into UX. Most people, I don't think, just go into UX directly. And when I was looking, I saw you made a post about when you were a waitress, and you were having this really long night, and it was, you hardly made any money that night, and then you had to pay out your tips, and you just kind of felt like you were just going to break down crying. I thought that was such a great story, because seeing where you were then leading up to where you are now at Google, I think it's really inspiring. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So back home, when I was working in El Paso, Texas, that's my hometown, border town, I was working for promotional companies. So I do have a background in hiring. I was a manager for a team of brand ambassadors. So if you've ever seen someone at the liquor store, like, hey, try this new bottle of Grey Goose. So I managed a team of wonderful ladies and gentlemen who did that. So I had a lot of experience with hiring in that regard, project management, operations management, which truly that is the skill set that helped me get to Google, in combination with my property management. But, coming from El Paso, it's not the biggest town. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. Even though I was able to gain skills and I loved that role and doing that job, I only ended up putting in about 20 hours a week. Because it was more of like a weekend gig. Typically when those sorts of promotions are going on, it's usually only on the weekend. So it wasn't sustainable, and I wasn't making enough money to support myself and my then fiance in medical school. So I had resorted to cocktailing and bartending on the side. And it was just, of course, it's a lot of fun being with, lots of people. It's that very woohoo, party, fun environment, but it can also be very toxic. There's a lot of people obviously drinking and things like that, and that can lead to fights, negative things. There was multiple times where I had to like pepper spray someone because it was like a dangerous situation, things like that. So I was gearing myself professionally, but I couldn't find any opportunities in my hometown. So when I moved, my opportunities grew. And so that's something I always recommend to people as well. Like if you're younger and you maybe don't have a family and you have the ability to move, that's only going to increase your ability to find a job or to find something that's really going to stoke your passions in that way. Because I definitely wasn't being fulfilled where I was, and it was making me pretty miserable.
Great. Yeah, and I guess what I'd like to know is like from that position, you eventually moved to Austin, and then obviously you got hired. Did you get hired by Google before you moved to Austin or after?
So I got hired before I moved to Austin, and I had to make the decision as to whether or not I was going to move. And that was a pretty big decision for me because, although I wasn't particularly happy where I was, generally bartending was sufficient enough to get me through, but I wasn't feeling like I was meeting my full fulfillment, like I was being used in the way that I should be, and really truly using my full brain. And so that was why I had been searching for jobs, and the opportunity at Google came about. And so it was a big leap of faith for me coming to Austin, just because, my contract was only guaranteed for a year. And I didn't know if it would get extended beyond that. So I had to sit with myself and say, Jennifer, do you really want to do this? Are we going to move across the state when this job is only guaranteed for a year? But the opportunity was amazing. I was like, how many people get the opportunity to work at Google, even for a year? This is something I need to do. And so I took the chance, and it was honestly one of the best, if not the best decision I've ever made.
Yeah. So another thing that I've really heard is that, and you can validate this or invalidate this, but if you are, let's say you've got somebody who is, who's like, they're very skilled, like, what most of the people who are tuning in here are UX designers. And let's say you're hiring for a UX position, and this person lives in, Topeka, Kansas, versus somebody who's in Austin, Texas. Are you going to be recruiting more for that location, or are you going to be recruiting more for that skill?
So it really depends on the place that you're applying to. I would say that if you're applying to smaller companies, they're really going to focus more so on location and trying to kind of find someone to meet the skill, because they will likely not be able to afford relocation of people. Larger companies, especially the tech companies, can typically afford to do that, and most likely will, especially if you are sort of a unicorn and meet the needs that they're looking for in that sense. So at least from a tech perspective, a higher level perspective, we really focus and hone in on your skills. That's the first place we go. I don't look at your name. I don't look at your photo. I don't look at where you're from. I look at, can you do this job? Yeah. And then usually if things come up with moving, that'll come up further on down the road, with compensation packages and things like that, as to whether or not that's going to be feasible. But honestly, and this isn't any sort of announcement, this is just like my perspective of where I think things are going. Based on, what I've seen from Twitter, what I've seen from Facebook, what I've seen from a lot of other companies, I anticipate most people moving to more of a remote format within the next, 5 to 10 years after realizing COVID has made us see that we can, sustain this workforce from home. So why not do it, save the money, et cetera. So I anticipate it going that direction, and in which case it would become, obsolete anyway, because you can work from anywhere.
Great. Awesome. And we have a question for you. So, again, I know you're not entirely 100% tied into the UX scene, but we'll go ahead and ask it anyway. So Kaylee says, in what areas is Google currently looking for support within UX design?
So I would say that a place we're usually always looking for UX designers is in marketing, especially because that's going to go more so hand in hand with the creative roles. So I would recommend looking for marketing things on the Google Careers page, as well as in the health fields. I think that the health field is growing dramatically, both within Google as well as other major tech companies. So I anticipate that only continuing to grow. So things in the health sphere be a good place to look for potential design opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm. What about voice interaction?
Voice interaction. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so like if you've got like your Google Assistant, for example, I mean it's
Oh, okay.
um, yeah.
Gotcha.
So like I've got my Google Assistant. I use it all the time. I've I just you might be happy to know that I like that better, much better than Amazon Alexa.
Oh yeah. No, I actually unfortunately still have the Alexas. I need to switch over to the Google because I
Mhm.
bought the Alexas years ago and I have like four of them and I'm like, I don't want to spend the money to switch them out, but I
Yeah.
really should because Google Home's a lot better. But yes, anything that involves like AI, anything that involves like smart home, making your home better, or any sort of like efficiency processes within like new softwares we're coming out with. Most of that stuff I don't know anything about, mostly because it's top secret and because
Yeah.
I don't design any of those things. But honestly, everywhere, like every aspect within a tech company is like scrutinized, like so with a magnifying glass. So there are designers in every realm. There are managers within every realm. There's recruiters in every realm, just because these companies are such a monster that they need to have everyone stationed in every sort of area. So my recommendation would be, what do you like? Kind of hone in like within UX, like what are you passionate about? What really gets you going, because you're only going to do better work if you're more passionate about a specific subject. So, and then, kind of hone and focus your job search on those sorts of roles.
Great. Love that. And guys, keep the questions coming for sure. You can jump in the room with us. You can comment your questions, but definitely keep them coming. And Jennifer, another thing that you said that you specialize in is resumes. So first, I want to ask you about the infamous ATS bots. So I know that um, I know recruiters and HR people usually tend to like them because it makes your job easier. Everybody else hates them so bad. What would you say for somebody who is applying to these jobs, like what they should be doing with their resume in order to make sure that it's not just immediately thrown out?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would say the number one thing to make sure your resume is not going to get thrown out by ATS or a recruiter is going to be making sure to match your resume to the job description. And that also involves getting very targeted with your job search and making sure that you're applying to roles that you're actually qualified for, so that you can, edit that resume accordingly to match. So an example I always like to give people is something like a project leader and a project manager, right? Two very simple terms, and they mean essentially the same thing. You can say led UX project that resulted in 85% increase, or you could say project managed UX project that led to 85% increase. It's essentially the same thing, but it matters how you say it. If the job description says it wants 1 year of project management, and your resume says, project leader for XYZ, generally, if I'm reading that, I'm going to understand that you were the project manager. But, with ATS bots, with people who aren't paying as much attention, when you're seeing 300 resumes a day, you want to make it painfully obvious. So if it's as simple as switching a word, from leader to manager, or if it's as simple from switching to like administrations to operations, things that are interchangeable, you want to reflect the specific verbiage that they used to make sure that your resume is going to make it through. But again, that involves you, making sure you actually have those skills so that you can hit hard upon those things within your resume.
Absolutely. And I actually posted a link for you guys in the chat. So it's for a service called Resume Worded. I actually used it when I was reapplying after I got laid off for COVID, and then I used it, and it actually helped me land my first job. You can do like the free version of it, and basically what it does is you copy the job description, and then you put it in this chat box, and then or it's like in the right column, and then in the left column you upload your resume, and then it basically like it compares the word usage, so it actually does make a lot of difference. One of my friends actually applied to the same company I work for. Originally he just sent in his resume as it was. It got immediately rejected. Then he went back, like used a service like that, changed a few words, and then they called him the next day. It was like, "Hey, do you want an interview?" So it really does make a difference. And I think that honestly the number one reason why resume get thrown out, and Jennifer, like, I want to get your opinion on this. I think the number one reason is just because your resume isn't ATS friendly. So, or it's not, maybe not ATS friendly, but it doesn't have all the keywords that the bot's looking for. So you got to be able to fine tune your resume to that job description using, like, even if you're just using some of the common keywords that you see in it, because your goal, like, you really need to get it in front of a person as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would agree, for sure, that in order to get it past ATS, you want to make sure to hit upon all of those things that you mentioned. And then specifically in regards to ATS and in regards to humans as well, you just want to make it painfully obvious because, in my regard, I'm not well versed in everything, right? I'm only 27. I'm one person. I'm an imperfect human. And even speaking in this situation, I don't know too much about UX specifically. So when I'm reading a UX resume, you need to make sure that I understand that you are meeting these qualifications. You need to, if that involves, of course, you want to have hard hitting data and hard hitting metrics, but if you need to dumb down your language a little bit to get your point across, you have to remember that a lot of times real people are looking at this and they may not be as well versed in the area that you're applying for, especially at bigger companies, because staffing is done by a specific team that not always is even a part of that team. So it's also understanding that maybe someone reading your resume isn't going to be someone who knows your field very well. And so understanding that and then trying to make sure that you word things accordingly so that people can understand what your qualifications actually are.
That's great. Yeah. So this does tie into user experience. What we're all professionals in is you have to be able to understand who your audience is in this case. So, your first audience is going to be the bot. Your second audience is going to be Jennifer. And then later, eventually it's going to go to the UX design manager. But you really have to understand the size of the company, where how many people are going to be looking at your resume, and if you can make it clear and easy to understand for them as possible.
Yeah, 100%. The easier you can make it while still including the important hard hitting data is the best. The best resumes I see, have, the snappy titles of the places that they work, a couple hard hitting metrics within, but are generally very simple. Your work should speak for itself, and generally does.
So I've got one more question for you, and then we're going to jump to a comment. What do you think about people who try to cram so much into their resume? They say, I've got all these accomplishments, I want to show everything. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
I'd say it can be both. It really depends on the person's resume and what else they have to offer. For a new grad coming out, they may only have 1 or 2 job experiences, in which case I would say, definitely list every little thing you did at that job, because you don't have much experience. You need to make sure that you're fully, putting out there what you've done. Obviously the things that are worthwhile putting on a resume. There's some things that I would never recommend putting on a resume just because they're not important enough to warrant putting them on there. But yeah.
Where they're saying I won a hot dog eating contest as a junior in high school.
When it comes to your personal stuff, I would say that doesn't really matter as much, especially when you don't need a hobby section, guys. You don't need really we're looking at what you did. That's going to come in the interview. That's going to come in, how can you make yourself unique? How can you make yourself sparkle and shine? That's really for the interview. Your resume should just be, more basic than that. I would recommend cutting that sort of stuff. I would consider that bloat. My resume only has my job, where I've worked, what I've done at those jobs, and my skills. That's all it has on it. It's very
I've heard that your resume shouldn't exceed 1 page. What do you think about that?
So that rule, I think, is kind of way out of date. I feel like that's something that they used to start. I don't even know when they started it. To me, I'm like, that started in the 1950s, and now we're still doing it today. That's not really a thing anymore, I'd say. Personally, I've only been in the job sphere for 10 years. My resume is already at 2 pages, and I don't plan on shortening it to 1 page probably ever again. Just because it's too hard sometimes to truncate your work. You know, how do you accurately describe all the things you did, especially at a job that's super high level or where you work with a lot of people or that's more complicated? You know, you want to make sure that you are accurately describing your soft skills, teamwork, collaboration, things like that, while also still hitting hard on data and metrics. So you don't want to get too long. I would say, you know, if you've been in the job sphere for like 30 years, yeah, you could have like a 3-page resume, but generally I would say keep it to 2 or less. And unless you've been in the world for a long time. But no, like even new grad resumes I see almost every day are 2 pages. It's sort of a thing of the past, but I will flag at smaller companies. You know, if you're applying to like a mom and pop type place, those places do usually prefer a 1-page resume. But when applying to big tech companies and things like that, make yourself shine. Don't truncate your work, because you never know which job experience is going to be the one that's going to qualify you for the role.
That's so funny. I would think it would be the opposite, actually. With so many people applying, you'd actually want to read less.
I mean, ideally what I want and what, you know, I should do for my job are 2 different things. And definitely what I recommend to people is different. I would love it if everyone sent in a 1-page resume, because they get to be a lot to read, but no, you need an accurate description of what someone has really done. And that can be hard to you know, get across in a 1-page resume.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump to a comment from Henry. So Henry says, how do you think the candidate screening process will change in the coming years? Will it change at all?
That's an interesting question. So I think, you know, some companies are going to go straight ATS. That's just going to become the way of the future. And if you don't make it past ATS, you know, that's unfortunately going to be it. But I know that there are still some big companies that really value humans looking at resumes. I know, you know, Facebook still does it. I know personally that's what I do for Google. I look at resumes, you know, most of the day. So I don't anticipate the companies that can afford to continue to have real humans do it. I think they will continue to do it because humans are superior in that way. Even me not understanding all the nuances of UX, I'm still going to do a better job than an ATS bot, because I'm going to look for other things like soft skills and, you know, collaboration, and take into account education and your academic, you know, things that you've done there. So I see it going both ways. It just depends on the resources you have available, and I'd say the size of the company.
Great. And then we're going to jump to another one. So would you please talk about portfolios as well? So I know that some tech professions don't really require a portfolio. You know, if you're hiring a developer, for example, versus a UX designer. But do you look at portfolios?
Yes, actually, for some of my creative marketing roles, I have had to look at portfolios in the past. And sometimes when applying for creative roles at Google, they will require a portfolio depending on the role and what it's asking for. So in recommendations in regards to portfolio, it's kind of hard to say, because I will say this: the ones that I have recruited for in the past, the hiring manager either wants like super clean portfolio, like they want to see all this like really like buttoned up, tied pretty with a bow type, like corporate, very cut and dry work. And then there's hiring managers I've seen who they're like, I want the portfolio to be like someone flung like paint at the page, and I want it to be like loud and bright and colorful and wacky. And so it really is going to come down to what that particular hiring manager is looking for. I may suggest, if you have a very versatile amount of work, maybe making more of a clean portfolio and then more of a fun portfolio, depending on what roles you're applying for. That way you can send them the one more geared to what they're looking for. But at the same time, maybe it doesn't hurt to have it all in one place, so you can show how broad you are, just kind of depending on how you want to look at it in that mindset. But I know generally when I recruit, they like to see one thing or another, depending on what realm of Google we're recruiting for. So something like Waze is going to be like more fun, whereas something like Google Voice is going to be more serious. So
know who you're designing for, guys. That's super important. So we're going to get to one more comment, and then we've got someone who's waiting in the room with us to go live. Was Shiny just disappeared. So yeah, if that person wants to come back, feel free to come back. We just got to get through a couple more comments and then jump right in with us. So the next one is from Ashita. So she said, I think you touched on this, but I should just ask this explicitly. What makes UX designers who do not have a lot of experience stand out in their application in comparison to other applicants who have more experience. So I think, what this kind of ties into is, do with a big company like Google, do they usually hire people with no experience, or is it more of one of those companies that does require a bit of experience before you can really be considered?
So I would say across the board, like in UX and not in UX across the board, most tech companies, and in my experience from what I've seen at Google, because I am even still applying for external roles as well, it's pretty difficult to come in with virtually no experience. Like really the only roles that you can come in with no experience for are generally going to be like an AVP role, which is basically like an assistant, or lower level staffing, so contractor type role, recruiting coordinator, things like that, or some sort of internship. Generally for designer roles, you're going to be looking at, I'd say, a minimum of 3 to 4 years experience. So I would definitely, potentially work at some smaller companies, work on projects with who you can, build your way up, build up your portfolio before applying. You want to make sure that you're a strong candidate. And that's additionally as well, because, hypothetically, let's say you land an interview and you're not ready for that interview. You don't want negative feedback to affect you in the future. So you always want to be strong when you're interviewing, which is why it's always important. And I stress to apply for jobs you're actually qualified for, so that you can make sure you're doing well in these interviews and succeeding. Because even if you don't get the job today, if you do well in the interview, they mark that down, and then potentially in the future, maybe they'll call you back.
Great. And so you guys can feel free to jump into the chat with us. Sometimes if we are talking, we're having a conversation, just be patient, please. Like hold on to us, and then we'll eventually let you in. But feel free to jump in, ask us questions. We got 15 minutes, guys, so just jump in and ask us. Ask us as many questions as you can. That's going to be of benefit to you, because really this is your time. So Vatch asks, has COVID changed the recruiting process? So I think we touched on this a bit when you were talking about hiring people who are going to be like outside, remote, or do you think, another thing that I'm curious about is, are companies like Google going to be paying that the location based on like where that person is, or do you think it's going to be based on where that company's located?
That's interesting. So I know now currently, and this is tech companies in general, they do usually base your pay based on where you're living, right? So like me doing this job in California, I would make more money simply because California has a higher cost of living than Texas. So that's a really interesting thought. I think that they will base it generally probably out of the hub that you're working out of. So if things go to more of a remote, permanently remote type place, I feel like people would still generally be assigned an office hub. Maybe if they don't even live there, that will be like their assigned office, just so they know where to go for problems and things like that. And maybe the pay scale would be set depending on where their home office was. But that's a really good question, because it really could go any way.
Cool. And then as we wait for more questions to fill in, Jennifer, you've got a sample of your resume up. Could you go ahead and share that with us and talk about the anatomy of a good resume and what's really going to help people stand out and be competitive with their resume?
Yeah, let's do that. Sharing now. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. Oh no.
No. You gotta call up the Google developers and chew them out.
I know. It's because it wants me to go to my system preferences. Okay.
While you're doing that, I hope you don't mind if I'm like asking you questions while you're troubleshooting.
All good. All good.
Okay. So one of the things that I'd like to ask about is cover letters. Now, cover letters, obviously it takes a decent amount of time to write a cover letter. And I found, like, in my experience, I've actually never really written a cover letter. But from a recruiter's perspective, I don't know how you see cover letters. I think like, in my case, like I usually let my portfolio and my LinkedIn presence and everything else like speak for me. But at the same time, I mean, does it help with ATS bots? Does it help like once it gets in front of a person? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I would say with cover letters, it's gonna depend on the scale again. So when it comes to cover letters at a big tech company, I'm gonna say that doesn't matter as much truly, because we are trained to give your resume an unbiased look. And in order to really do that, we just assess for the qualifications. So really not looking at anything else. And and not that it's a bad thing, but cover letters really give people like a chance to advocate for themselves, and they usually have a lot of extra fluff per se. And so we really just focus on the meat of the resume in that sense. And so we really don't look at the cover letters, and I don't really look at cover letters in what I do on a day-to-day basis. If it comes down to me needing to decide between two people, or the recruiter need to decide between two people, it could potentially come down to a cover letter if they provide extra like supplemental information in there. But really anything in your cover letter should be on your resume. So that's typically not the case.
Okay, I'm really glad to hear from a recruiter's perspective that my job hunt strategy is not terrible. I was actually, and the reason why I was doing that is because I actually read an article from a senior UX designer who had been doing this for 20 years. And he's, in the opening part of his article, he said, I never look at cover letters. I barely glance at resumes, and I spend all my time on the portfolio. So, and I found like cover letters are usually like, they're really time consuming. And I've applied to enough or like more than enough jobs with a cover letter and spent all this time like carefully crafting it, making it perfect. And then it gets thrown out by the ATS bot. And maybe that's made me super bitter. I don't know, but I think it's made me a little bit more efficient in the in the job hunt scene.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, if you're applying to big tech companies, guys, I would honestly say you can skip it. Don't ATS isn't going to look at it. Honestly, people probably won't look at it too much. Definitely in a smaller setting though, a smaller company, a place where you're going to have more of like a face-to-face close type interview, a cover letter can set that tone and make a difference. So that would be the times that I would say you want to continue to use them.
Cool. I'm gonna pull up another one. So Vatch says, do you ever look at the section on LinkedIn to make your decision? Vatch, I'm not entirely sure. Oh, the about section. Okay, that makes sense. Do you ever look at their LinkedIn profiles in the about section?
So yes, I would say that's going to be something that more sourcers use than recruiters. So I'm on the active side, but there is the passive side. Like sourcers are, looking for people. They're looking for UX designers. They're looking for project managers. They're looking for people who make content. And so they go hunting, on the internet. That's their job. And on LinkedIn for designers and people like you, they're going to be the ones who are focused on that about me section. And just a couple tips there. It should be in first person. You want to talk about yourself like I did this, not like resume version where you're talking in third person. You want to make it more personable, like you're having a conversation with someone. Keep it, somewhat brief, and try to, hit hard with a couple of metrics in there. Whatever you've been able to accomplish, try to provide some data if possible.
Great. So we're actually gonna throw you a curveball here.
Okay.
From Henry. So this is a Google related question. It's not a recruiting related question. Hopefully it doesn't get you in trouble. Just kidding. Random question. A lot of UX designers are not happy with the new Google logos. What do you think of them?
Of the new logos. I've heard people talking about this, but I'm not sure I've seen them. Is it on like the regular Google homepage?
Yeah. So like if you go into Gmail and then you pull down the more like the pull down the tab that has like all the icons in it.
Right.
Those icons changed. They were like they're very distinct shapes and images a little while ago, and then they just changed it. So now It's like they've got the same color scheme. The shapes kind of look similar. I remember like like a few days ago, I went in there and I'm looking at this. I'm like, what the hell? This looks like this rainbow of shapes that look similar. Like I couldn't find my calendar for the longest time and I had a meeting coming up.
That is too funny. No, it's, the day that it updated on my work laptop as well. And so it did throw me for a couple of days, but I think I've gotten used to it. I like the kind of colorful version. I think I might have a dissenting opinion. I think I might like it.
Yeah. All right. So
I emailed you my resume, Sam, because it's my screen's not letting me pull it up, but if you can pull it up.
yeah, sure. Go ahead and send it to me and then I'll pull it up. Are you going to send it through LinkedIn or email?
Through email.
Okay, cool. I will keep an eye out on my email.
Awesome.
So guys, I'm looking around because I've basically got like this NASA command station with several monitors. So that's what I'm doing. So Shiny has a question. She said, by LinkedIn presence, what exactly should stand out for a recent graduate?
So by link, okay, that's a great question. So I would recommend that you optimize your LinkedIn profile. That's what's really going to make you stand out. So you want to make sure you're looking at your banner, your LinkedIn photo, your About Me section, your featured section, your experience, your recommendations, pretty much everything. But you want to make sure that your banner really focuses on what you do. You want a professional photo. We just talked about me, so follow that advice about keeping it brief, but having some metrics, using it in first person, and make sure you're including your job experience on your LinkedIn profile. So when you're looking at someone's job experience, sometimes it'll just say what they did. Like mine will say staffing channel specialist. And if I didn't describe what I do, then you're missing out on a lot of ability to be sourced and to convey to others, what your talents are, because you aren't further describing what you specifically do in a role. So making sure that you list that out, similar to your resume, but you don't necessarily want to have all the same information. LinkedIn is a little bit different, but make sure you're thorough. Try to get some recommendations if you can as well. Those are super useful and something that sourcers often look for on your LinkedIn profile is the recommendations.
Cool. And Shiny, I know you tried to jump into the chat room with us. Feel free to, I mean, if you still got a question you want to ask, like feel free to jump in. That goes with everyone else. We've got about 5 more minutes, guys. So use this time while you've got it. Ask us questions, jump in the chat with us. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen because I just got your resume.
Very nice. Don't judge it, guys. Okay? No.
All right, guys. So this is Jennifer's resume. Obviously, we've changed, like, there's been some things changed about like personal information and stuff, but we're going to look at the overview of what makes this resume awesome. So Jennifer, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah. So again, this is my resume. Not trying to toot my own horn, but I did spend a lot of time on putting it together. So what you can see from this is it's pretty plain, right? There's not a lot of colors. There's not a lot of exciting stuff because it's really about my job experience and what I've done. It's a pretty boring resume. And that's usually what I recommend to people is a pretty boring resume. Unless you're applying for, UX designers are a little bit different. I know sometimes designers like to get a little fancy with their resumes. I would say strike a balance if you're gonna do that. You don't want your resume to get like too designy because oftentimes if it's too pretty, it becomes difficult to read your work. Or some of those like pretty templates people use forces the work to not be the biggest thing in your face, and your job description of what you've done in your roles needs to be the most important thing. So I have a brief summary here, and then you can see that I've broken up the page as I kind of underline my job experience all the way across. You want like lines, and you don't necessarily have to do it this way, but you want some separation of somewhat on the page. You kind of want to parse things out. It makes things look more neat, more organized. And you want to make sure that, you have your font big enough to read. If I was trying to put all this on one page, it would be impossible to read, which is why I went ahead and did 2 pages. I have my education at the bottom as well as my skills at the bottom as well. New grads, you can keep your education up top for a year or 2, I'd say, but then generally you want to move your education to the bottom because your work experience is going to be what is most important.
Yeah, so one of the things I really want to ask to you, usually I hear that you only need you should only have like 2 or 3 bullet points, but I could see that this is a lot of text. Like, this is a lot to sift through. So why do you have like so many bullet points when most of the time you only hear like have 2 or 3 and make it really brief and succinct?
Well, and I always tell people there's no right way to do a resume. You know, everyone's resume is different. And you should be happy with it at the end of the day. So take everything with a grain of salt. But for me personally, like if you scroll down to the other ones, those ones are definitely more succinct and have like less experience, and I'm definitely more succinct there. But you want to, give as much detail as possible. I'd say in your current role, that should be the one that does have the most, experience for it. Or, if you're applying to tech companies, places like that, the roles that are going to align most closely. Like, let's say you worked in UX from 2012 to 2015, and now you're doing something different. Make sure you hit hard on that experience as well, because that's what they're going to really hone in and focus on if you're now applying for a role that was more similar to something that you've done in the past. So it's really just trying to make sure what you're doing now is conveyed well. And also there's just a lot of bullet points, because what I do now at Google really is almost like 3 different people's jobs that like were cut and parsed into one. And so it's a kind of a complicated space to work in. And so I just want to make sure that I accurately reflect everything that I do. And so I highly recommend, make it as long as you need to make it. I limit myself to 10 bullet points. I won't go over 10. But if you look at everything there, everything is like hard hitting and has either a data or a metric or something that I accomplished. So you can continue to put more bullet points. Just make sure that they are of value and not just like, got coffee for someone. You want to make sure that it, everything has a purpose and that everything has impact in what you put on your resume.
Yeah, and you also mentioned stats in your description too, which I think I always make a habit of making sure I'm telling a story with numbers, whether it's in my portfolio or it's in my resume, because I really want to show what kind of metrics I'm able to deliver. What are your thoughts on working, instead of just saying, or as telling your story with statistics and with numbers?
That is like one of the best things you can do on a resume, quantify what you've done and show what you've done with data. I always tell people, when you're looking at your resume and you're not sure what to put and thinking about your impact, ask yourself, like, what did I accomplish? What did I change? How did I go about changing it? And what data can I use to prove that I changed it or how I changed it? So that data is just a way to back you up, prove your story. And you definitely want to use as many quantifiable metrics as possible.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen, and then we're going to get to a couple comments. So Vatch says, I'm transitioning from being a senior graphic designer to UX design. How much of my graphic design work should I include in my resume without it overpowering my UX experience?
Interesting. I usually advocate for, doing your full experience. I wouldn't truncate anything. I would just make sure that if, you were in a graphic sphere before and now you're going to more UX, make sure whatever, UX qualifications you have, whether that be certifications or whatever, sphere you're coming from now that qualifies you in that UX sort of way, make sure you're hitting really hard upon that. And within the job experience, I would make that one, the one with the most amount of bullets, with the longest, try to make that stand out where you can, but definitely include all your graphic designer experience as well, because that's only going to continue to back you up and speak to the fact that, you know what you're doing and that you've been in the design realm for a while, which helps to instill confidence.
Great. And then Shiny says, for a person who is switching career paths, would it be a right direction to highlight what you've done in that role and how that helps for the job role you're applying? I would say absolutely 100% yes. If you haven't spent so much time in UX, what I always say is find something that is tangentially related. So, for example, like I came from I was a researcher in Alaska. I actually was like studying bald eagles up there. I had come from a science background. It's not UX related, but you know what actually got me my first UX job was because I said, I understand numbers. I understand data. I know how I can, I know what I'm looking for, how I can how I can basically like get measurable results. I said like I'm not the strongest when it comes to visual design, but I'm very much about using my research background to really understand how effective my designs are, and if they're really making a significant impact as opposed to just creating a bunch of pretty things on a screen. What do you think about that, Jennifer?
No, 100%. I mean, you want to put, and that's why I advocate for everyone to put all of their experience on their resume, because you never know what a particular recruiter or a particular hiring manager is going to say meets the specific requirement. You know, maybe they're asking for project management. And like I said, like ATS, you really wanted to say it on there. And when I'm reading it, I really wanted to say it on there. But that's not to say that I don't understand when reading a resume sometimes that someone has project management and they didn't explicitly say it. That's why humans are superior, because I can read between the lines in that sense. And so, then you go to the hiring manager, you have all these different people with these different nuances, and they're going to look at all these people and say, okay, this is the right kind of project management experience that I'm looking for, because it's transferable, because they've done XYZ in a previous role. So yeah, always include all of your experience. Always, include that, because transferable skills are one of the biggest things that are going to get you hired. And you never know which transferable skill from which role someone's going to look at and really value.
Do you think that if somebody is coming in from, I mean, of course, like I know there's some individuals like Vatch he has graphic design experience, but then he also has UX experience. What I would personally say in that case, and you can feel free to like let me know your thoughts, Jennifer, is like use, like if you're applying for like an art director position, then you want to pull from your background that really more closely aligns with your art direction skills. Or if you're applying to UX and you don't want to like pull all of your graphic design experience, you want to pull from, I mean, yes, mention the graphic design experience, use it to an extent, but then talk about how that ultimately ties into creating the bigger business outcome for that company. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree in that sense. That's why I often recommend to people to make a master resume. If this is something that you don't have, I highly recommend. And so the master resume should include everything you have ever done ever. Like I'm talking about like that time when you were 16 and you led a summer camp all the way to today, every single job you've ever had. And you're not going to use this resume in that sense, but you want to make like a master log of everything, and keep it fresh, keep it, up to date with data, even in your current job, because there will be times when you're applying for jobs in the future where you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to pick out certain times in your life where you did certain skills, and make a resume that really shows that journey, of you using this throughout different pieces of your life. So then you can kind of plug and play and take, project management from this time and this time and this time. And then you'll sort of have a resume already ready to go based on the experiences you need that you can, then change depending on which role you're applying for.
That's great, and that's sort of similar to something that I do in my personal job too, which is like I'm very very focused on documenting everything that I've done, every the process that I'm going through, like every little accomplishment I've made. Like I'm making, I make it in like this very comprehensive Word document, or like on Google Docs, and I make sure that from there, I'm pretty much like cataloging everything I've worked on, and so that way, when I'm creating my portfolio, I can, or if I'm creating my resume, then I can pick out these certain parts. If I'm creating a portfolio, and obviously, I'm not going to show work that I can't show, but I'll be able to talk about what I've accomplished in that role, and it also. Not only is it helpful for that, but it's also helpful for when you're communicating with your team members. So you can with people across other departments. So that way you can catalog what you've worked on, and you can pull these little instances. And also, like sometimes this is what I've learned from working in agencies, is that sometimes you're going to work on a certain project for a while, and then the shiny object syndrome will happen, and you'll have to work on another one, and you go 6 months without working on this previous project, and then you have to jump back to it, and you're like, what the hell was I doing on that that's where I say, like, document everything you've been doing in your job, because that will, uh, if you find yourself in a situation where it's like you want to, you eventually want to like move to a different job, or you want to communicate something to another department, or you just it just helps you in general, and it's a really, really good practice to always be cataloging your work. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. Take notes, keep notes, stay organized in every regard. Especially because I've often had people, they leave a job or something, and maybe they're out of work for a couple of months, and then they don't update their resume, and then they go back and they're trying to remember, like, when did I leave? When did I, and that stuff needs to be consistent. Like if your LinkedIn has a different date than your resume, like that's a big red flag to us and things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely keep notes, stay consistent. And then it only makes it easier to refer back and help you when you want to apply for different roles.
Cool, guys. So we are over time. We're gonna pull up one more question, and then I think we're gonna be wrapping up. So Vatch says, how far back should you go with your work experience? I heard you should not put anything past 5 years on your resume. So Jennifer, you've just been like pounding out I guess resume myth after resume myth after resume myth, and like my mind is getting blown right now, because like everything I thought I knew about resumes is getting turned on its head as I talk to you. So could you talk a bit about that too?
Yeah, sure. So I would say basically whenever you're applying for a role, if they ask for a certain number of years of experience, assume they want a couple years more than that. So like if they're asking for 3, they probably want 5. If they're asking for 5, they probably want 7. If they're asking for 7, they probably want 10. So just keep that in mind when you're applying for a role. It's important to know, because a lot of people don't realize this. Like when they're saying that, like minimum qualifications, it's the minimum. The bar's down here, right? And so why does some place like Google or Twitter want to take someone down here when they can have someone up here? This is the minimum, which is why it's usually the people who get hired have a couple more years of experience. So I would say, keep it relative to the role you're applying for. If you're applying for a role with 8 years of experience, you have 15 years, I would say show the full 15 years in that case, because they're looking for someone a little bit more tenured, and you want to show what you've done before and how those skills can be transferred. Whereas I will say a lot of recruiters can be ageist as well. So let's say you're looking for, a job's only asking for 8 years of experience. If you have 25 years of experience, I would maybe only show the last like 15. Again, you don't necessarily want to show everything because sometimes people will quote unquote age you out. So that would be the only time I would say to potentially look at it and flag it, is if you are someone who is more experienced and you're trying to apply for a role that is, requires less experience. Maybe you want to get into a big company and you don't care that it's a pay cut or whatnot. We have people who do that all the time. Then I would say go in that direction.
Absolutely. And guys, something that I think is really important to remember is that companies like Google are very, very competitive. Jennifer, I'm sure you've experienced this firsthand. Even just getting a contractor role probably wasn't easy. So I think that if you are starting out in your career, it's probably best, like build your experience however you can. And I'm not going to say that, you shouldn't eventually aspire to work at Google if that's what you really want to do, but consider that, a lot of these like major tech companies really are asking for 3 years of experience. They're really asking for 5 or 6. They're asking for 5 years of experience. They really want 8. So you might be better off if that is your ultimate goal, is just like build your experience however you can. If it's like volunteering, or if it's just working for like a little like mom and pop kind of tech company, or something where it's like, you can build it small and then eventually work up. What do you think?
100%. No, 100%. And that's a smaller company is also going to allow you more opportunities to grow initially. And that's something recruiters also love to see. We'd love to see growth and trajectory. Like if you started, as a cashier, and then you moved to floor manager, and then you moved to general manager, like that shows us that not only can you learn and be taught, but you want to grow. And it can be harder to grow and to, get promoted in bigger companies. So, start off small, build your skills, keep taking LinkedIn courses, Coursera courses, things like that, and just continue to grow your trajectory. And it's only going to make you a more competitive candidate in the future.
All right, guys. So we actually went over time. So I'm gonna go ahead and let Jennifer go. But yeah, if you guys, I'm sure you could connect with Jennifer if you'd like to. Also in the description, I do have a Google Forms sheet for pretty much where you can suggest show topics or you can suggest new guests. That really helps me a lot. So please take a few minutes, fill that out. It helps me get more people on the show, and it helps me get topics that you guys want to talk about. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being on. Everyone, again, this is Jennifer Garibay. I know I didn't say that right, but she's a recruiter at Google. And Jennifer, thank you again for being on with us.
Yeah, of course. This was great. I hope it was helpful, guys. And do please connect with me.
Cool. All right, guys, have a good day.